You are listening to Verba Manit, where words do remain.
City sama Habsi.
Abruptly, on February the 24th, 2021, A. Ganapathy was called into Gombak Police Station in Malaysia for questioning related to the whereabouts of his brother, who was thought to be in association with gang-related crimes. What was meant to be a mere assistant to the police at Gombak Police Station quickly turned into a suspicious 12-day police lockup, followed by a shocking call to Ganapathy's mother that her son had ended up in the intensive care unit as he was going to get his leg amputated. On April the 18th, he was pronounced dead. Hello, and welcome to Right the Wrongs, a show under the Verba Manit podcast. Every Wednesday and Friday, Right the Wrongs raises public awareness on pressing human rights issues and creates an incubator of activism. This episode is part of a UN Millennium Fellowship initiative intended to bring you closer to stakeholders directly affected by issues around the world. Today we're sitting down with a Malaysian friend of ours who prefers to remain anonymous to discuss police brutality. We'll be holding a workshop with him on the 9th of October to exchange ideas, opinions, and points of view on the subject. The confounding story presented to you in the introduction is part of many that found themselves at the heart of public debate as the people of Malaysia took to social media to express their concern over the violation of human rights through deaths in police custody. The outcry on social media concerning the case aforementioned was a display of much needed attention on an issue going on for decades. Indians suffer from the highest ratio of deaths in police custody, followed by the Chinese. Despite statistics showing Malays to be the highest in the number of deaths, it's worth noting that ethnic Indians only make up less than 7% of Malaysia's population, but account for 23% of officially reported deaths in custody. However, the numbers could be substantially higher, as only a quarter of deaths in police custody cases are brought to public attention. Furthermore, what is baffling to many is that the perpetrators of police violence tend to be of the same ethnicity as the victim. This leads us to ask some of the bigger questions. Why do policemen feel the need to cause bodily harm to someone who they perceive as a bad person? Is the victim a known repeated offender? We will discuss these questions here and during the workshop on the 9th of October. So far, only one case was reported in bringing two policemen who violated the law on deaths in custody to justice. This case was taken up by the late renowned lawyer Kapil Singh, who won the case after one of his clients died in police custody. Despite this apparent victory, these two policemen only had 18-month sentences each, going to show how lightly police violence is taken. We do not know if they got a longer sentence when Kapil Singh appealed through the High Court, but we do know that police violence severely misplaces the already corroded trust that the Malaysian people have in their police force. Failing to institutionalise and respond to calls for an Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission, or IPCMC for short, to be set up since 2019, further propagates the status quo. Now back to the issue of Ganapathy. He was a 40-year-old cow's milk trader and a loving father to two children, aged 5 and 7 respectively. On the 24th of February, he was interrogated by police officers at Gombak Police Station regarding the whereabouts of his brother, who was affiliated with gang-related activities. The assistance turned sinister when Ganapathy was mysteriously admitted into the intensive care unit at Selayang Hospital on the 8th of March, with the urgent need to amputate his leg. Despite having diabetes and cardiovascular problems, S. Dhanalakshmi, Ganapathy's mother, assured the police that her son was in relative good health before being detained by the police for 12 ongoing days. In her police report filed on the 11th of March, she claims that her son complained that the policeman at Gombak Police Station had beaten him severely with a rubber hose, which led to the amputation of his leg. Ganapathy's health worsened when his sister's request to hand over his medications to him was refused. On the other hand, on the 13th of April, Chief of Police Arifai Taraway claimed that Ganapathy never complained of being beaten by the police, either to the magistrate or to the medical officer who treated him. On the 18th of April, he was pronounced dead. Was it his death caused by this declining health, or was it at the hands of a few policemen who took it too far? His lawyer has stated that there is only some feedback from the autopsy. An unofficial report remains to be released. It affirms some of the speculation that he was severely beaten, as evidenced by the devastating bruises on his body. On April 30th, Arifai issued a stern warning to the public not to make any comments of the case on social media, as they would be prosecuted by law. The father of two is yet to receive justice. We do not know how long the investigation will carry on. We do not know if the perpetrators will ever be brought to justice. And we do not know if journalism publications in Malaysia will continue to be silenced. Here is where we will deepen our examination of this issue by getting insight on what life is like in Malaysia for its minorities. We will do so by bringing in a very special guest, also a Sciences Po student, to speak on these issues. He is a Malaysian Indian who spent 12 years in a Malaysian Chinese environment and his whole life integrated in a Malay community. He is also one of the very few non-Malay government scholars, another institutional issue in and of itself. For security reasons, he would rather have his name omitted. This discussion will take place with the founder of Verba Manent, Pietro. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special episode of Right the Wrongs. Only one thing is for certain. The more Malaysians unite at the forefront of their cause and are able to have freedom of speech to discuss this issue, the stronger the pressure on politicians, the judicial system, and the police force to institutionalize change.
Hi, thank you very much for joining. First, let's start with the bigger issue. Can you contextualize the position of power of police in the country?
Sure, it's a pleasure. Firstly, I think when we want to talk about the position of power of the police as a whole, we have to realize that the police are generally viewed as people that the community or people in general can confide into. However, when we talk about position of power of police in Malaysia, it's quite different because though that was a Western concept of people confiding in the police, in Malaysia it's a bit different because people actually fear the police. And that's generally how things are in Malaysia. If they are people of authority, then perhaps the police might have a position of inferiority towards them. However, for everyday commoners, everybody is afraid of the police.
And how does race factor into this?
Perhaps we should begin with the idea of minorities as a whole. When we speak about people being minorities, generally we bring in the concept of socioeconomic inequality. And to be as honest as possible, when we bring in the idea of socioeconomic inequality, we have to understand that many times these minorities are displaced in society, given lesser opportunity for education, lesser opportunity for many benefits that other minorities might receive or even the majority might receive. That then engenders them into becoming this part of society that seems like a part of society that is very, very detrimental to the whole image of society. Hence, when we talk about crime rates, for instance, Indians, as the minorities, have a tendency of contributing towards higher crime rates in Malaysia. And that's probably why, in general, people fear the idea of Indians as a whole. And the police then have an advantage over this. They then have a reason to treat Indian people badly as a whole.
So the case of Ganapathy is not an isolated one.
Absolutely not. In fact, there are way too many things for me to say about the previous issues that have happened in the past. And for instance, just to mention a few names, we have M. Krishnan, we also have M. Thanasilan, Kugan, Gunasegaran Rajasundram, Thomas Orions Iwan Siha, all of these people, and not to mention Balamurugan. And the only reason why I'm not actually describing what actually happened in these cases is because you have to go and read how goric and how terrific, like how horrendous these situations were. They were genuinely very, very bad cases of police brutality that at many times were just shoved under the carpet and forgotten about by the public.
And of course, any of these people ever received proper justice. However, I'm wondering, where does the structure of racial segregation that is then also reflected by police brutality come from?
It actually is a historical explanation. From the very beginning, the British brought Chinese and Indians into Malaysia, and when they brought us in, they also distributed us based on labor, where Indians ended up being in rubber tapping estates, while Chinese people went into more of mining, gold, and also metals. And with that, it ended up becoming a whole loop for whatever socioeconomic state that generations had to experience. And since I'm Indian and we are talking about Indians over here right now, the Indian situation was a bit worse because of how they were put into rubber tapping estates where they had zero access to education, they had zero access to facilities, they had zero urbanization, and all the access that was present at the time were in the cities, whereby you then have a large chunk of communities, especially the Indian communities, being stuck in the loop of lack of education and all the facilities that they really require in order for them to grow out of poverty. Not to mention the fact that they were really being underpaid to a very, very large extent. So given these circumstances for Indian people as a whole, the younger generation for Indians then had to go through very, very little education. They had very, very little opportunities other than just continuing whatever their family members or the older generation was doing in the past. Hence, they always resorted into crime rates as inflation occurred, where they couldn't afford things, where they didn't have proper education about morals, education about anything for the matter. They always resorted into crime. And this is the reason why many types of stereotypes actually existed. But when you ask yourself the question of whether this is the fault of Indian people or the fault of a government, then ask yourself the question of why exactly Indian people couldn't actually escape that cycle of being in a position of not having access to anything at all.
Okay, so and with respect to this, I'm also wondering then if there is this segregation, are today Malaysian Indian people fully integrated in the society, or does the society recognize them as something different, maybe as something that is not fully or probably Malaysian?
Oh, that's actually very interesting. The whole idea of racism in Malaysia itself has its special aspects to it. Firstly, you have the racism towards, based on the aspect of color, where people are generally going to discriminate you if you have a darker shade of skin. And there's also culture, where people make fun of cultures. Like, for instance, if you were to wake up in the morning and ring your bell during prayers, that's something people make fun of. There are racial slurs calling you the K word, Keling, and also a position of authority. And this is something that's really important, because for the vast majority of people, especially people in political institutions or political parties, they use the idea of making Malays the superior race to garner more political support and to garner more hatred towards different races. And this is where that structure of racial segregation actually comes up and amplifies to the very max, where people fear these aspects and they introduce these aspects systematically into the system.
Okay, so then with this in mind, I think we should get back to the case of Ganapathy and see how the public react to is that.
It wasn't really something surprising at all. In the beginning, everybody was rather hyped up. Everyone was posting on Instagram and Twitter. Everyone was voicing out their opinions. The vast majority of people just reposted and probably included a few sad face emojis. But after a few days, you didn't see action really being taken place. And despite having politicians speak up about it, despite having a lot of people just making things viral, in the end, we even had politicians being called for investigation just because they posted a video questioning PDRM, the police of Malaysia, and asking why exactly this type of injustice is occurring in the House of Justice. And after all of this commotion, the hype just dies. And everybody has forgotten what exactly happened. Nobody actually is going out to the streets and protesting. Nobody is going out to the streets and questioning why things like these are happening. And until now, we still have, after cases of Ganapathy, more police brutality towards the Indian community in Malaysia.
But then we should ask, is this issue of hype dying down and public attention being diverted to other stuff something that happens only when the issue deals with the Malaysian Indian community, or is the same treatment reserved to Malay people and their issues?
That's very, very interesting of a question, because not only is it something that is being downplayed, but also the fact that when it comes to problems of the majority itself, when there is a problem or racial situation that is being faced by the majority, you definitely have much more attention. The media is going to put a lot of attention on it. Everybody, even politicians, are going to speak out a lot more about it. And just to give you a few examples, for instance, during a protest that occurred in Seafield Temple, during the point of time where the government intended on moving Seafield Temple to somewhere else, and the Indian community were very, very against the idea of that. And there was a large-scale protest. And during this protest, and during this violence, it was definitely violent. During this violence, a fireman, Adib, passed away. And while that was taking place, the situation in Malaysia was completely different, because everybody was furious towards the Indian community in Malaysia. Everybody was very, very angry. And that was a situation, that was a scenario that wasn't emulated when the same thing happened for Ganapathy. That wasn't the similar situation in Malaysia when something happened to all the other cases of police brutality towards the Indian community in Malaysia. If you're asking me if this is a problem just because it's Indian and like the people who are facing these problems are Indian and whether or not that's the reason why they are not getting as much of attention, I cannot give you a solid yes. But when I can draw a parallel like this to you, I'm pretty sure you can draw quite a conclusion in your mind.
Thank you very much for all the important information. Our interview ends here, and I will give the word back to Mason.
That's the end of today's episode on police brutality in Malaysia. Feel free to engage with us on Facebook and Instagram, and join us for further discussions on the Telegram group, or leave us a comment at theverbamanentpodcast@gmail.com. To deepen the discussion and exchange opinions on the subject, join us for our workshop on the 9th of October. For more details, see the description below or visit our Instagram page. This episode was written by Shania and Tatiana, recorded by Mason, produced by Luis, and brought to you by Right the Wrongs under Verbamanent. You can find the program wherever you find your podcasts, bringing you detailed updates on pressing human rights issues. Till next time, take care.